A king died in screaming agony, his crown jewels swallowed by the sea. This is the story of King John, the legendary villain of Robin Hood tales. His official death certificate reads dysentery, a common medieval affliction. But the circumstances of his final days are a perfect storm of disaster and betrayal, whispering a far darker possibility. By the end, you will become the jury in a 900-year-old murder mystery, weighing the evidence for a natural death against a shocking royal assassination. We will examine a vanished fortune, a suspicious feast of peaches, and a kingdom saved by a timely demise. What do you think we will find when we peel back the layers of this ancient story? To understand the mystery of his death, we must first meet the man. King John remains one of England's most despised monarchs, a ruler whose very name became synonymous with failure and tyranny. His reign was a relentless cascade of disasters. He inherited a vast empire from his brother, Richard the Lionheart, lands stretching from the Scottish border to the Pyrenees. Yet within a few years, he had lost the crown's ancestral heartland, the Duchy of Normandy, to the King of France. This catastrophic military defeat earned him a humiliating nickname that echoed through the chronicles, John Softsword. It was a label that spoke of perceived cowardice and weakness, a deep stain on the honor of a medieval king. But John was not just weak, he was also widely hated. He was notoriously cruel, known for taking hostages from his barons' families and letting them starve in his dungeons. He was seen as deceitful, greedy, and untrustworthy. His own nobles grew so desperate with his arbitrary taxes and brutal punishments that they finally rose up against him. This rebellion forced his hand at Meadow in the year 1215, where he sealed the famous Magna Carta. That document was not a noble gift of liberty. It was a peace treaty extracted by armed barons, limiting the king's power and demanding he govern by law. John signed it under duress, and he immediately wrote to the Pope to have it annulled, plunging England back into civil war. This is the boiling cauldron of a kingdom we enter in October 1216. King John is 48 years old, marching with his army across the country, fighting his own barons who are aided by a French invasion force. The realm is fractured, bankrupt, and burning. And then, suddenly, the king falls ill. His death at this precise moment is not just a personal tragedy, it is a seismic political event. He leaves behind a 9-year-old boy, Henry III, as heir. A child king in the middle of a war is a recipe for total collapse. So we must ask, in this world of violent ambition and deep hatred, who stood to gain from King John's timely exit from the stage? The answer to that question lies not in a doctor's notes, but in the wreckage of a royal treasure train. That lost fortune was more than just gold. It was the literal fuel for his war. In the autumn of 1216, King John was a man running on fumes. His final campaign was less a majestic military procession and more a desperate, scorched earth retreat. He marched his army through the flat, watery landscapes of East Anglia, a region thick with rebel support. His goal was to confront the dual threats closing in on him, his own rebellious barons and the army of French Prince Louis, who had been invited by the rebels to take the English crown. But John was not marching to a glorious battle. He was reacting, lashing out, burning towns and manors that had sided with his enemies. The chronicles describe a trail of smoke and ash left in his wake, a king punishing his own kingdom. The mood was one of profound chaos and deepening dread. Physically, John was no longer a young man. The relentless stress of years of military failure, political betrayal, and now a civil war he was losing had taken its toll. He was described as irritable, paranoid, and increasingly isolated. This was not a robust leader in his prime, but a cornered, exhausted, and bitterly angry man, pushing his body and his remaining loyal followers to the brink. Every decision was made under the crushing weight of impending doom. His treasury was empty, his reputation in tatters, and his enemies were at the gates. It is against this backdrop of utter desperation that we must view what happened next, for it was in the middle of this frantic, burning march that the king suddenly decided to stop for a meal. The king's desperate march would soon meet the geography of its own doom. To reach the relative safety of Lincolnshire, John faced a formidable natural barrier, a vast bay of tidal mudflats and shifting channels known as the Wash. The longer, safer route around this estuary would have cost him precious days he felt he did not have. His enemies were closing in and speed was paramount. So he made a fateful, almost reckless decision. He ordered his army to take the dangerous shortcut directly across the treacherous sands of the Wash at low tide. It was a calculated gamble, a race against the sea itself. The chronicler Roger of Wendover paints a vivid scene of the king's immense baggage train lumbering onto the exposed flats. This was no ordinary convoy. It contained the entire portable wealth of the English crown, the literal tools of kingship. We are talking about the royal treasury, sacks of silver pennies minted for paying soldiers, gold and silver plate, precious relics, the king's own collection of jewels and rings, and even the ceremonial regalia like the crown of Edward the Confessor. This was the financial engine of John's war, and his entire cultural heritage, loaded onto a slow-moving line of carts and pack animals. The king himself, with a smaller, faster party, made it safely across to the far bank. But behind him, disaster unfolded with a terrible, slow inevitability. The local guides, it is said, became lost in the fog or misjudged the tides. The incoming North Sea surge did not arrive as a single giant wave, but as a relentless, silent flood across the flats, swirling through the channels faster than a man could run. The baggage train, bogged down in the mire, was utterly overwhelmed. Panic would have been instantaneous and absolute. Men and horses screamed, fighting against a cold, sucking grip that offered no escape. The heavy carts, laden with treasure, sank without a trace. The sea swallowed the crown's wealth whole. By the time the waters receded, everything was gone. The psychological blow to John was catastrophic. The chronicles describe a man plunged into a deep, black melancholy. All his worldly power, his means to fight, his very symbols of authority were gone in an afternoon. He rode on to the nearby Swine's Head Abbey, a broken man, reportedly in a state of shock and profound despair. This moment is critical for our mystery. We have a king already under immense physical and mental strain, who then suffers a devastating personal and financial catastrophe. Medieval medicine firmly believed in a direct link between emotional shock and physical illness. Could the trauma of the Wash have triggered a fatal collapse in his health, or does the sheer convenience of this disaster, wiping out a fortune that could have prolonged the war, point a finger in another direction entirely? He arrived at the Bishop of Lin's palace, a ghost of a king. The man who stumbled into that grand residence was not the fearsome tyrant of legend, but a hollowed-out figure, shivering with a chill that no fire could warm. The chroniclers, writing in the years that followed, recorded the sudden and violent onset of his illness with stark clarity. It began with a gripping, cramping pain in his abdomen, so acute it doubled him over. A raging fever soon followed, burning through him. But the most relentless symptom was a severe and debilitating diarrhea, one that left him weak and drained. This rapid progression from shock to sickness is our first crucial piece of medical evidence. In the medieval world, the diagnosis would have been straightforward: dysentery. Yet that single word was a vast, murky bucket into which doctors tossed a multitude of fatal stomach ailments. It described the symptom, not the specific cause. True bacterial dysentery, spread through contaminated food or water, was a common camp follower of medieval armies, a plague of poor sanitation. But the timing here is peculiarly precise. John had just suffered an unimaginable psychological blow. His body was exhausted from constant campaigning. His immune system, by any modern understanding, would have been critically weakened. So the official story makes a certain grim sense, a broken man succumbing to a common illness of the time, yet we must scrutinize those symptoms more closely. Acute abdominal pain, fever, and violent diarrhea are indeed hallmarks of dysentery, but they are also the hallmarks of something else, something far more sinister that was readily available in the 13th century: poison. Several common toxic substances, like arsenic or certain poisonous plants, could produce an identical clinical picture, a brutal inflammation of the gut that medieval observers would have had no way to distinguish from a natural disease. This is the central medical ambiguity of the case. The chroniclers saw a familiar pattern and named it, but did they witness the cause or merely the effect? The answer may lie not in the symptoms themselves, but in what happened next during a seemingly innocent stop for refreshment. The king's symptoms fit a pattern every medieval chronicler knew by heart. In the 13th century, the word dysentery was a terrifyingly broad diagnosis. It described not one specific disease, but a grim suite of fatal gastrointestinal disasters. When a monk wrote that a king or a common soldier died of the flux, as it was often called, he was describing the end result, a body racked by dehydration and fever from relentless, often bloody diarrhea. The actual causes hiding behind that single word were numerous and deadly. It could have been shigellosis, a brutal bacterial infection spread through contaminated food or water, which ravages the intestines. It could have been amoebic dysentery caused by a microscopic parasite, or it could have been any number of other severe foodborne illnesses like typhoid or even cholera. The critical point is this: medieval medicine had no microscopes, no concept of germs or bacteria. A doctor would diagnose based on what he could see and what he believed. The theory of the four humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, ruled all understanding of health. An illness like dysentery was seen as an extreme imbalance, often caused by corrupted food or water, or even by malign air and bad smells. So in King John's case, his physicians would have looked at his symptoms, considered his recent trauma and the conditions of his march, and delivered a verdict that made perfect sense for the time. A king traveling with an army was living in a perfect breeding ground for such diseases. Sanitation was primitive at best. Water sources were easily polluted by latrines and animal waste. Food, especially in a hurried camp, could spoil quickly or be prepared with contaminated hands. The official cause of death is therefore entirely plausible. A stressed, exhausted man, after a profound shock, consumes bad food or water and succumbs to a rampant infection. It is a clean, logical, and historically consistent explanation. But modern knowledge forces us to pause. We now understand that the symptoms of severe bacterial dysentery and the symptoms of certain types of poisoning are virtually indistinguishable, especially to an observer from 800 years ago. Both attack the gut with savage efficiency, so while dysentery is a perfectly reasonable suspect, it is not the only one that could have committed the crime. The evidence is circumstantial, based on the observable effects on the body. To find a motive, we must look beyond the medical notes and into the heart of a political conspiracy, beginning with a seemingly harmless basket of fruit. From the bishop's palace, a feverish and desperate king began his final journey. He could no longer ride, so his attendants placed him in a horse-drawn litter, a curtained bed swaying along the rutted tracks of Lincolnshire. His destination was Newark Castle, a formidable royal fortress still loyal to his cause, but each mile must have felt like an eternity of pain. Inside that rocking litter, John was a prisoner of his own failing body, attended by physicians who wielded the only tools their age understood. They would have offered fervent prayers for his soul, believing illness was both a physical and spiritual affliction. They likely prepared herbal concoctions, bitter brews of plants like mint or wormwood meant to soothe the gut or rebalance his corrupted humors. The more drastic treatment, bloodletting, was a common cure-all, based on the idea that draining bad blood would restore equilibrium. For a man already dehydrated and weak from diarrhea, such a remedy could have been a death sentence in itself. Yet one specific treatment, recorded by the chronicler Ralph of Coggeshall, stands out like a flare in the dark. He reports that at some point in this agonizing journey, the king was given a medicine of ale and peaches. And in a stark, shocking aside, the chronicler states this remedy was what actually killed him. The image is bizarrely vivid, a dying man being fed sweet, fermented peaches. But was this a sincere medical effort or something far more deliberate? The timeline tightens the noose of suspicion. King John fell ill around the 9th of October. He died in the black hours between the 18th and 19th. That is a span of only 9 or 10 days from first symptoms to final breath. For a robust man in his 40s, even with a severe infection, this is a startlingly swift collapse. It suggests a toxin or a pathogen of extraordinary virulence, something that ravaged his system with terrifying efficiency. This rapid decline does not disprove dysentery, but it certainly makes you lean closer and listen harder to the whispers of the past. Why would a chronicler single out a simple remedy of fruit and ale as the murder weapon, unless he had heard rumors, unless he suspected the peaches themselves were the perfect vehicle for a poison? Newark Castle rose from the mist, a grim silhouette of Norman power. Inside its thick stone walls, in a chamber likely lit by flickering torches and tallow candles, King John faced his end. The air would have been thick with the smells of sickness, of herbs, of sweat and fear. Among those attending the dying king were his most loyal mercenary captains, hardened Flemish and Poitevin soldiers whose pay had just sunk into the wash. Their presence was a guard against both external enemies and internal betrayal, a final circle of steel around a failing sovereign. His last actions were those of a king, however broken, trying to impose order on the chaos that would follow him. He dictated his final will. In it, he formally named his 9-year-old son, Henry, as his heir to the fractured Kingdom of England. More crucially, he appointed a regent to rule in the boy's name, the man often called the greatest knight in Christendom, William Marshal. This was a stroke of political genius from his deathbed. Marshal was a legendary figure, respected by friend and foe alike for his unwavering sense of honor and his formidable military skill. By placing the kingdom and the child in Marshal's hands, John was making the one move that could possibly save his dynasty. It was an admission that his own name was poison, but that the institution of the crown might survive if led by a man everyone trusted. Then came a deeply personal and curious instruction. He asked to be buried not in the grand Angevin mausoleum at Fontevraud Abbey in France, where his father Henry II, his mother Elena of Aquitaine, and his brother Richard the Lionheart lay, but in Worcester Cathedral in England. This was a profound symbolic break. After a lifetime of ruling a cross-channel empire, he was choosing English soil. Was it a final apology to a kingdom he had ravaged? A practical choice, knowing France was now enemy territory, or a desperate bid to anchor his son's claim firmly to England itself. As the night of October 18th deepened, his breathing grew shallow. The chronicler simply states he was taken by a fit of his illness and died. With his last breath, the Civil War did not end, but its entire equation changed. The hated king was gone. In his place was a blameless child and a regent of unimpeachable integrity. The rebellion against John lost its core purpose in an instant. Who would you follow into battle now? A French prince invited to depose a tyrant, or a legendary knight defending a helpless boy king? The deathbed decisions were a masterclass in damage control, transforming a catastrophic defeat into a fragile, salvageable peace. But this very salvation forces us to ask the darkest question of all. If the realm was saved by John's timely death, who among the saved might have been tempted to help time along? The historical record of his death is written in ink and bias. To judge the case, we must first question our witnesses. The most famous account comes from Roger of Wendover, a monk at St. Albans Abbey, writing a decade after the events, his description is vivid and damning. He states plainly that the king died of a grievous illness, a surfeit of food and drink, and most specifically, a fever and dysentery. His contemporary Matthew Paris, who later expanded Wendover's work, echoes this diagnosis without hesitation. On the surface, this seems definitive. These men were chroniclers, the historians of their age, recording events for posterity. But we must pause and consider the source. Both were monastic writers, and the monasteries had suffered terribly under King John. He had taxed them ruthlessly, seized their property, and was locked in a bitter feud with the Pope that saw England placed under a punishing interdict, halting church services for years. To these monks, John was not just a bad king, he was a persecutor of the church, a tyrant against God's own institution. Their chronicles drip with contempt for him. So when they report his death from a humiliating, painful disease, we have to ask, are they reporting a verified medical fact, or are they delivering a moral verdict? In their worldview, a wicked king dying in screaming agony from a bodily affliction was divine justice, a fitting end. Their bias does not mean they lied, but it does mean their interpretation of events was filtered through a powerful lens of hatred. They had every reason to believe God would strike down such a man with a common, undignified illness. Their certainty about dysentery might be less about medical knowledge and more about theological satisfaction. Were they recording the cause, or were they crafting the narrative of a deserved punishment? For a more neutral perspective, we must look elsewhere. The Chronicle of Barnwell Priory, while still critical of John, is notably less venomous. It reports the illness and death with far less colorful commentary, simply stating the king was seized by a violent fever and a flux of the bowels. Another account, the Annals of Waverley, offers the same basic facts without the moralizing. These quieter, more straightforward reports lend significant weight to the dysentery theory. They suggest that across different regions and houses, the basic story was consistent. A king on campaign fell violently ill with classic symptoms and died. This consensus is powerful evidence, yet even these neutral sources were not doctors at the king's bedside. They were recording the information that reached them, the official story circulating in the aftermath. In the chaos following a monarch's death, especially one so despised, the first story to harden into fact is often the one that serves the new regime. And in 1216, the new regime desperately needed the war to end. So we are left with a critical puzzle. The chroniclers we rely on all point to a natural cause, but their motives for doing so range from the gleefully partisan to the blandly administrative. None of them had access to the truth we seek, the truth of what truly happened in the king's gut. To find a motive for murder, we must look past the scribes and directly at the people who stood over his dying body. The scene inside that litter was one of profound vulnerability. To build a case for foul play, we must think like detectives, examining the classic trinity of motive, means, and opportunity. Let us start with motive, because in the shattered kingdom of 1216, the list of those who wanted King John dead was distressingly long. At the top were the rebel barons, the men who had forced the Magna Carta upon him. They were in open warfare, allied with the French Prince Louis, who had landed to seize the crown. John's death would instantly invalidate their entire cause for rebellion, which was personal hatred of the king himself. With him gone, they could negotiate with a child and a respected regent, potentially keeping their lands and privileges. His death was their clearest path to peace and security. Then there were the French. Prince Louis and his father, King Philip Augustus, had a vested interest in removing the Angevin king permanently, clearing the way for a French dynasty on the English throne. But perhaps the most intriguing suspects are those closest to him, his own remaining allies. Consider his loyal mercenary captains. Their pay, their future, had just vanished into the tidal mud of the Wash. Their contract died with the king's treasure. Could their loyalty have snapped in that moment of financial ruin? or even members of his own household, weary of a losing war and a tyrant's rage, seeing a chance to end the suffering and perhaps earn favor with the winning side. The motive was everywhere, a thick fog of desperation and ambition. Motive is plentiful, but what about the means? If this was murder, what weapon was used? The 13th century assassin had a grim botanical arsenal at their disposal. Common garden plants held terrifying power. Monkshood, also called aconite, was a familiar killer. Its roots could be mistaken for horseradish, and even a small amount causes burning in the mouth, followed by violent vomiting, crippling stomach cramps, and diarrhea, a perfect mimic of a severe gut infection. Then there is belladonna, or deadly nightshade. Its berries deceptively sweet. It causes fever, delirium, and digestive havoc. And of course, there were mineral poisons like arsenic, often available in compounds used for rat poisoning or even in certain medicines. The symptoms of arsenic poisoning are a textbook match for our mystery: intense abdominal pain, vomiting, and relentless watery diarrhea leading to fatal dehydration and shock. The critical point is this: any of these poisons, administered in a single dose or in smaller, cumulative amounts over those final days, would have produced a set of symptoms that a medieval observer would have had no way to distinguish from a vicious case of dysentery. The means were not only available, they were tragically common. This leaves us with the final pillar: opportunity. Who could have slipped the fatal agent into the king's food or drink? The window was surprisingly wide. We know he was entertained at the Bishop of Lin's palace just as he fell ill. The kitchens and serving staff there were not his own, they were the bishop's. Any agent of the rebels or anyone bribed could have contaminated a specific dish meant for the king's table. Then there is the journey itself. As he traveled in that litter, weak and reliant on his attendants for sustenance, his vulnerability was absolute. The chronicler Ralph of Coggeshall points a damning finger at that peculiar remedy of ale and peaches. Think of the opportunity there, a soothing, sweet concoction prepared especially for the sick king. It would have been a simple matter for a disloyal servant, a bribed physician, or even a desperate knight to add a powdered toxin to the mix. The peaches themselves would mask any bitter taste. In his weakened state, he would have consumed it without suspicion. So we have a perfect storm, a multitude of people with powerful motives, access to undetectable poisons, and multiple chances to administer them during his final, desperate week. The case for natural causes is strong, but the shadow of a calculated murder now falls long and dark across the narrative. This forces us to confront the most unsettling suspect of all, a man whose honor was legendary, the very man John entrusted with his kingdom in his final breath. The first and most obvious suspects sit across the battlefield. The rebel barons had staked their lives and lands on the removal of King John. After the drama of Runnymede, the peace shattered almost immediately. John's swift move to have the Magna Carta annulled by the Pope proved his bad faith, and the barons knew that as long as he drew breath, their own survival was in grave doubt. Their hatred was not just political, it was deeply personal. Many had seen family members taken hostage, their castles seized, their inheritances challenged by the king's arbitrary will. This was not a polite disagreement over taxes, it was a fight to the death. Their ultimate act of defiance was the ultimate betrayal in John's eyes. They formally invited Prince Louis of France, the son of their old enemy King Philip, to cross the Channel and take the English crown for himself. By the autumn of 1216, Louis held London and much of the southeast. The barons were now traitors in the eyes of the crown, a fact that guaranteed their execution if John won the war. This creates a powerful and urgent motive. On the battlefield, John's death would be a chaotic public event, potentially sparking even greater violence and leaving his hardened mercenary captains free to seek brutal revenge. But a quiet, internal death from illness, something that looked like a natural consequence of his frantic campaign, that was different. It was a cleaner exit. Eliminating John through poison would achieve the primary war aim, removing the tyrant while avoiding the messy martyrdom of a king slain in combat. A child king, 9-year-old Henry, presented no threat. He could be controlled, bargained with, or set aside in favor of Louis with far less bloodshed. The rebellion's entire justification to rid the land of a wicked king would be fulfilled overnight, so the barons had the clearest motive of any group. Their very lives depended on John's demise. But did they have the access? Infiltrating the king's immediate household on the march would have been difficult but not impossible. Spies and turncoats were a constant feature of medieval warfare. A bribed servant in the kitchens of the Bishop of Lynn, where John first fell ill, is a distinct possibility. Or consider the network of local supporters, the very barons and knights whose lands John was burning as he marched. One of them, pretending loyalty, could have offered a gift of food or wine, a fatal courtesy to a passing king. Poison was a weapon of stealth, perfect for a group that needed the result but could not afford to be seen holding the blade. If a baronial agent did slip a toxin into the king's meal or that infamous peach remedy, they achieved a staggering strategic victory without firing another arrow. The civil war effectively ended with John's last breath, and within a year the barons would make peace with the young Henry's regents. They got what they wanted, survival and a return to law, and the man they hated most was gone. It is a compelling and logical case, but were the barons the only ones who saw a bright future in the king's darkness? Another suspect waited much closer to the throne, a man whose loyalty was about to be tested in the most profound way. Prince Louis of France held London in his grip. The invitation from the rebel barons had transformed him from a foreign prince into a claimant to the English throne, his soldiers garrisoning castles across the southeast. For Louis, the political mathematics were brutally simple. While King John lived, Louis was an invader, leading a risky war of conquest against a sitting, albeit hated, monarch. His claim, based on his wife's distant lineage and the baron's invitation, was legally shaky and required force to sustain. But if John were to die, the entire board changed. Suddenly, Louis is no longer fighting to depose a king, he is fighting to succeed one. The primary obstacle, the living embodiment of Angevin rule, vanishes. In its place stands a 9-year-old boy, a child who could be more easily sidelined or disinherited. John's death would have streamlined Louis's path to legitimacy, transforming a messy rebellion into a clearer succession dispute. The benefit for the French faction was not just compelling, it was potentially war-winning. But could they have acted on it? The idea of French agents infiltrating John's camp is less far-fetched than it sounds. Medieval courts were porous. Messengers, merchants, and mercenaries moved constantly between lines. A skilled spy, posing as a servant or a disaffected local guide, could have found a way into the orbit of the king's traveling household. More plausibly, the French could have turned someone already inside. John's own forces were a patchwork of loyalists, paid foreigners, and men whose allegiance was fraying by the day. A promise of French gold or a guarantee of future lands under a new regime could have been a powerful temptation for a frightened or ambitious courtier. The method would have been classic espionage, not a battlefield clash but a silent kitchen door assassination. Imagine a single agent, his identity lost to history, slipping a tincture of monkshood into the wine served at the bishop's palace or into the medicinal ale prepared days later. The symptoms would manifest as a natural, if violent, illness, drawing no immediate suspicion of foul play. For Louis, this was the perfect crime. It removed his rival without martyring him, and it cast a pall of divine judgment over the entire Angevin cause. A king struck down by God for his sins was a powerful narrative for the French to promote. Yet, this very perfection is also a point against the theory. Louis was winning, his forces were strong, his allies held key territories. He might have believed he could defeat John on the field and take the crown by right of conquest, a far more glorious path for a medieval prince than a covert poisoning. Would he risk the scandal of regicide by poison, a crime considered especially heinous when victory seemed within his grasp through conventional means? The French had motive and likely the means, but did they have the urgent necessity to act? That question leads us to look even closer to the king, to the men who shared his bread and witnessed his final, agonized breaths. But a shadow of suspicion also falls on the hallowed ground of the church itself. King John's relationship with the church was a saga of mutual destruction. For years, he was locked in a bitter power struggle with Pope Innocent III over who had the right to appoint England's bishops. The Pope's response was the ultimate spiritual weapon. He placed all of England under an interdict. For 6 long years, from 1208 to 1213, the church doors were sealed. No masses were sung, no bells rang, no Christian burials were permitted. The sacraments, the very rituals that defined medieval life and guaranteed salvation, were withheld from an entire kingdom. John retaliated by seizing church lands and property, bleeding the monasteries dry to fund his wars. He was excommunicated, cut off from the body of the church, a spiritual leper. This was not just a political dispute, it was a war for souls, and the clergy suffered deeply for it. Although John and the Pope eventually reconciled in 1213, with the king even declaring England a papal fiefdom to get back in the Pope's good graces, the scars ran deep. Years of resentment and humiliation do not simply vanish with a signed document. In the hearts of many devout churchmen, John remained the king who had made war on God. This brings us to a chillingly specific location, the Bishop of Lin's palace, where King John first exhibited his fatal symptoms. He was a guest in a churchman's house, eating food prepared in a churchman's kitchen, served by churchman's staff. The opportunity for a zealous, unforgiving servant of the church to act was not just present, it was handed to them on a platter. The mindset of the time makes this dark speculation even more plausible. To a medieval fanatic, poisoning a tyrant who had persecuted the church might not have been seen as murder at all, but as an act of divine justice, a means of carrying out God's will with human hands. They could believe they were merely the instrument, accelerating a judgment that heaven had already decreed. The chroniclers themselves, mostly monks, certainly saw his death as exactly that, a punishment from God. Would one of them have been tempted to help that punishment along? It is the most speculative angle, lacking the clear political motive of the barons or the French, but it is perhaps the most ideologically pure. It asks us to consider a terrifying possibility that the king might have been killed not for land or power, but for the salvation of the realm's soul by someone who believed they were doing holy work. This ecclesiastical shadow adds a layer of profound unease to the mystery. Yet all these suspects, the barons, the French, a rogue churchman, operate from outside the king's innermost circle. To find the most shocking possibility of all, we must look at the man standing faithfully at the deathbed, the one person everyone trusted absolutely. The most intimate betrayal is often the most devastating. We have examined enemies across the battlefield and shadows within the church, but the final suspect circle is the tightest and most treacherous, the king's own inner circle. John's rule was a masterclass in creating distrust. He was notorious for turning on his closest allies, seizing their lands on a whim, and holding their children hostage to guarantee loyalty. This atmosphere of fear and paranoia did not foster devotion, it fostered a desperate, calculating self-preservation. In his final days, surrounded by men whose pay had literally sunk into the sea, that fragile loyalty was stretched to its absolute breaking point. Consider the composition of his retinue. By October 1216, many of the great English barons had already abandoned him. Those who remained were a mix of die-hard loyalists, foreign mercenary captains, and men like Fawkes de Breauté, a Norman knight of low birth whom John had elevated to great power and wealth. These were men bound to the king not by ancient feudal ties, but by money, favor, and the shared prospect of victory. Their allegiance was a transaction. And on the march from the Wash, that transaction had just been catastrophically voided. The treasure train was not just the crown's wealth, it was their personal fortune, their promised reward, the entire financial engine of their service. Its loss transformed their future from one of potential riches to one of certain poverty and probable execution if the king fell. This creates a motive born not of ideology but of cold, stark survival. Could a mercenary captain, looking at a bankrupt, dying king and a lost cause, have decided to cut his losses? Eliminating John could be seen as a grim business decision. It would instantly end a costly war they could no longer afford to fight. It would allow them to negotiate their own safe passage out of England with the victorious rebels, perhaps even keeping some of their seized lands by switching sides. A dead king is a liability that ceases to demand payment. The method, again, points to that vulnerable period in the litter or at a roadside stop, who had easier, more consistent access to the king's food and medicine than his own attendants. A weary, resentful servant or a knight fearing the noose could have seen poison as a ticket to safety. The chronicler's note about the fatal peaches and ale takes on a new, darker hue in this light. Was that medicinal drink prepared by a loyal physician or by a traitorous hand within the household, someone who knew the king would accept it without question? Fawkes de Breauté himself embodies this precarious loyalty. He was fiercely loyal to John during the war, a brilliant and ruthless military commander. But after the king's death, he did not fade away. He initially served the regency of young Henry III with the same vigor. His loyalty, it seems, was to the institution of power itself, or to his own position within it, rather than to any single man. If a man like Fawkes or one of his captains believed John's continued life meant the utter destruction of everything they had built, would they have intervened to stop it? The argument is one of brutal pragmatism. With John alive, the war rages on, treasure is gone, and defeat looms. With John dead, the war can end, a peace can be negotiated, and a skilled soldier might find employment under the new regime. It is the coldest calculus of all, turning the king from a patron into a problem to be solved. So we are left with a haunting tableau around that deathbed at Newark. The loyal William Marshal receives the king's final wishes. The mercenary captains stand guard, and in that room, amidst the prayers and the dying breaths, we must wonder if any of those faces hid a secret, not of sorrow but of grim satisfaction. The evidence for this internal betrayal is entirely circumstantial, a shadow cast by motive and opportunity. But in the paranoid court of King John, where trust was the rarest commodity of all, it is a shadow that fits perfectly. This brings our investigation to its final, most critical phase. We have 4 compelling suspects, each with motive, means, and opportunity. Now we must step back and weigh all the evidence we have gathered, from the stormy sands of the Wash to the quiet horror of the deathbed chamber, and ask the ultimate question. That peculiar medicinal remedy hangs over the entire case like a poisoned fruit. The chronicler Ralph of Coggeshall did not simply note the king was ill. He made a specific and shocking accusation that a drink of ale and peaches is what actually ended the king's life. To understand if this was murder, we must dissect this recipe. On one hand, it paints a picture of tragic, almost farcical accident. Could a king really be killed by bad fruit? The answer is a cautious yes. Unripe or spoiled peaches in the 13th century, stored without refrigeration and transported in rough conditions, could harbor a host of dangerous bacteria like Salmonella or Listeria. For a man already weakened by dysentery, a new, severe bacterial load from rotten fruit could certainly deliver the final, fatal blow. This is the accident theory, a simple case of terrible timing and bad luck, a king whose body was too broken to handle one last insult. But the chronicler's phrasing implies intent, a remedy that killed. This shifts our focus to the ingredients themselves, not as spoiled food, but as potential components of a weapon. Unripe peach pits, leaves, and twigs contain compounds called cyanogenic glycosides. When crushed or chewed, these can release trace amounts of cyanide. In a large, concentrated dose, this could be lethal. More practically, the bitter almond taste of cyanide could be masked by the sweetness of the peach flesh and the strong, fermented flavor of new ale or cider. Then consider the ale itself. In an age before clean water, ale was a staple drink, but its brewing process was not sterile. It could be contaminated with molds or toxins. More sinisterly, it was the perfect medium for dissolving a powdered poison like arsenic or monkshood, a cloudy, flavorful liquid that would hide any unusual color or sediment. The combination is eerily perfect for an assassin. A sick king is expecting a soothing, gentle medicine. The sweet peaches would encourage him to drink it all. The strong ale would cover any bitter or metallic taste from a toxin, and the entire act would look like an act of care, not violence. So we are left with two starkly different possibilities sitting in the same cup. One is a tragic mishap, a final, cruel twist of fate for a man already doomed by infection. The other is a chillingly clever murder disguised as compassion, using the very tools of healing to kill. The chronicler who recorded it believed it was the latter. His certainty forces us to look past the ingredients and into the hands that prepared them. Who would have had both the knowledge to concoct such a potion and the access to serve it to a dying king? The king's symptoms are a 900-year-old medical puzzle. While dysentery and poison are the prime suspects, modern medicine allows us to widen the diagnostic lens and consider other fatal conditions that would have been utterly mysterious to medieval observers. Let us step into the role of a historical physician for a moment, armed with modern knowledge but constrained by 13th century circumstances. One strong alternative is acute appendicitis. This common, excruciating ailment begins with severe, cramping abdominal pain, often around the navel, before localizing to the lower right side. It causes fever, nausea, and can lead to a rupture, flooding the abdomen with infection, a condition called peritonitis that is almost always fatal without surgery. For a king on a bumpy litter jostled for miles, a developing appendicitis could easily have ruptured, bringing a swift and agonizing end. The symptoms would mirror those of a severe gut infection, perfectly explaining the chronicler's accounts. Another possibility is a perforated peptic ulcer. Imagine the king under immense, unrelenting stress for years, his stomach constantly churning with anxiety and rage. This stress could have eroded his stomach lining, creating an ulcer that suddenly burst open. The result is similarly catastrophic, a sudden, knife-like pain followed by fever and systemic collapse as digestive acids leak into the body cavity. Both appendicitis and a perforated ulcer are internal mechanical disasters, invisible to the eye but brutally efficient, and completely untreatable in an age before antibiotics and surgery. Then there are other infectious diseases to consider. Typhoid fever, spread through contaminated food or water, produces a high, sustained fever, profound weakness, and severe gastrointestinal distress, including diarrhea. It was a common scourge in armies and crowded, unsanitary conditions. Given the state of John's campaign, typhoid is a very plausible candidate. It could have been incubating for days before the dramatic onset at Lynn, triggered finally by his physical and emotional collapse after the wash. This theory elegantly ties the environment to the illness, but we must also look beyond the gut entirely. The king was a man in his late 40s under extreme duress who had just suffered a massive psychological shock. Could the real killer have been his own heart? A severe heart attack or myocardial infarction can present with crushing chest pain that radiates into the abdomen and back, accompanied by sweating, nausea, and a profound sense of doom, symptoms easily mistaken for a gastric crisis. The stress of the treasure loss alone could have been enough to trigger a fatal cardiovascular event. In the chaos of his final journey, attended by physicians looking for humoral imbalance, a heart attack would have been an invisible, incomprehensible cause. So we are left with a spectrum of plausible natural deaths, each fitting the historical description in its own way. This does not rule out poison, but it builds a powerful case for tragedy over treachery. It reminds us that the human body, under siege from within, can fail in many ways that look identical from the outside. The medieval world had only one word for such a catastrophic internal failure: dysentery. Our modern vocabulary gives us half a dozen. Yet in the end, all these diagnoses lead to the same grim room in Newark Castle. The mystery deepens not because we have fewer answers, but because we now have too many that fit. This forces us to pivot from the medical evidence to the political outcome, for in history, sometimes the consequences of a death speak louder than its cause. The treasure swallowed by the sea presents a mystery within the mystery. What if the disaster at the Wash was not an act of God, but an act of man? The official story is clean and tragic, a king's fortune lost to a rogue tide. But let us scrutinize that story with the cold eye of a detective. A baggage train carrying the crown jewels and the royal treasury does not simply vanish without a trace. It sinks into mud and water. In the days and weeks that followed, with the king dead and the realm in chaos, who was looking for it, the new regency under William Marshal was focused on one thing only: saving the kingdom from the French and the rebels. A sunken treasure, however vast, would have been a low priority. This creates a tantalizing window for theft. Imagine a small group of conspirators, perhaps the very soldiers escorting the train. They see the tide turning, the panic setting in. In the confusion, they could have diverted a cart or several chests, hiding them in a pre-arranged spot on the shore before feigning the total loss. The treasure then sinks twice, first into the mud and then into the silent vault of a conspiracy. If this happened, the story of the total loss becomes the perfect cover. Everyone believes the wealth is gone, so no one goes looking for it. But such a secret is impossibly dangerous. It only remains safe if the one person who might eventually order a search, the king himself, is no longer in a position to ask questions. This ties the lost treasure directly to the king's death with a sinister logic. If John had lived, even in defeat, he would have demanded an accounting. He would have ordered men to dredge the sands, to question every surviving guard. A stolen treasure cannot stay hidden under such scrutiny, but a dead king cannot investigate anything. His sudden, convenient illness, beginning just after this catastrophic loss, starts to look less like bad luck and more like necessary silence. Poison becomes the guarantee that the secret of the treasure stays buried forever. The conspirators would not need to be grand rebel lords. They could have been a handful of pragmatic, greedy men within John's own retinue, men who saw the writing on the wall and decided to secure their own futures. The means were there, the opportunity was the chaotic crossing itself, and the motive shifts from political to purely criminal. The king's death transforms from a strategic necessity into a personal insurance policy. This theory turns the entire narrative on its head. The emotional shock that supposedly triggered John's illness might have been a very real and very justified fury, not at the sea, but at the betrayal of his own men. Did he suspect a theft in those final, feverish days? Did he whisper accusations to his closest attendants, sealing his own fate? The chroniclers, hearing only of a terrible natural disaster, would have had no reason to doubt the official tale. A sunken treasure and a dead king from dysentery made for a tragic but coherent story. They would never have thought to connect the two events as cause and effect in a criminal plot. So we are left with a haunting question that echoes across the centuries. Was the treasure truly lost, or was it found by the wrong hands, and did a king have to die to keep that discovery quiet? The king's final breath did not bring silence, it brought salvation. In a twist of fate so profound it feels like a narrative device, the death of King John instantly healed the very wounds he had inflicted. The Civil War, which had been a personal crusade against a hated tyrant, lost its reason to exist the moment he was gone. The rebel barons were not fighting to overthrow the monarchy itself, they were fighting to remove one specific, unbearable man. With that man dead, their righteous fury had nowhere to land. Overnight, the terrifying King John was transformed into a passive symbol, the departed father of a blameless 9-year-old boy. This is the supreme irony at the heart of our mystery. In life, John was the greatest threat to his own dynasty. In death, he became the key to its survival. The man who turned that key was William Marshall, the legendary knight appointed by John on his deathbed, moved with breathtaking speed and political genius. He had the young Henry crowned king in a rushed but sacred ceremony at Gloucester Cathedral, using a simple golden bracelet for a crown since the real one was at the bottom of the wash. This act was not just symbolic, it was a masterstroke. It created a legal and spiritual fact on the ground. England now had a crowned and anointed king, a child under the protection of the church and the most respected knight in the realm. Marshall then reissued the Magna Carta in the boy's name, stripping it of its character as a treaty forced on a tyrant and rebranding it as a benevolent gift from a new, just regime. Suddenly, the rebels' main demand had been voluntarily met. What were they still fighting for? The answer, for many, became nothing at all. The cause fractured. The barons began to drift away from the French Prince Louis, whose claim now seemed less like a liberation and more like a foreign invasion against a helpless child and a national hero. Marshall, old but ferociously effective, rallied the remaining loyalists and won a decisive battle at Lincoln, followed by a naval victory that cut off Louis's reinforcements. Within a year of John's death, the French prince was negotiating his withdrawal. The Plantagenet dynasty, which had been teetering on the brink of extinction, was saved. All because the one person unifying the opposition had been removed from the board. This stunning reversal is the foundation of the loudest argument for murder. In Latin, it is called cui bono, who benefits, and in the autumn of 1216, the list of beneficiaries from John's death was not just long, it included virtually everyone of importance except John himself. The rebel barons benefited by securing a peaceful settlement and keeping their heads. The loyalist barons and Marshall benefited by ending a war they were losing and preserving the throne for John's son. The church benefited by dealing with a more pliable regency. Even the ordinary people of England benefited as the fires of civil war were stamped out. When a single event creates so many winners, suspicion naturally follows. John alive was a liability to his own side and a magnet for hatred from his enemies. John dead became a convenient martyr, a figure whose legacy could be softened and whose son could be used to unify a broken kingdom. This creates a motive so vast and diffuse it is impossible to pin on any one group. It was, in a dark sense, in the national interest for the king to die. And when something is in everyone's interest, the question shifts from who wanted it to happen to who was willing to make it happen. Did someone simply decide to give fate a decisive and fatal nudge? 900 years of silence rest beneath a carved stone effigy. The final piece of tangible evidence in our mystery lies not in a chronicle but in a cathedral. King John was buried as he requested before the high altar of Worcester Cathedral. His tomb is a masterpiece of medieval sculpture, a painted effigy showing the king in repose, crowned and holding a sword, his feet resting on a lion. It is a deliberate image of regal power and piety, crafted by the very regime that succeeded him, but the stone figure is a mask, a public face for eternity. The truth, if it survives, lies in the bones sealed within the marble coffin beneath it. This is our crime scene, frozen in time and sanctified by centuries of prayer. The frustrating, tantalizing fact is that the tomb has never been opened for proper scientific examination. In the 1800s, during renovations, the coffin was reportedly seen and described as containing skeletal remains, along with the remnants of a robe and a sword, but no forensic study was conducted. The opportunity to apply modern science to this ancient death has so far been lost, so we are left to wonder what secrets could those bones tell. If we could examine them today, the analysis would be meticulous. Forensic anthropologists could study the skeleton for signs of chronic illness or trauma, but the most critical tests would be chemical. Hair and bone act as a biological ledger, recording exposures to certain substances over time. A single strand of hair can tell a story of weeks or months. The key would be to test for heavy metals, particularly arsenic. Arsenic, a common poison of the age, incorporates itself into keratin as hair grows and into bone mineral over the long term. If John was poisoned with a significant dose of arsenic in his final days, elevated levels could potentially still be detected in any surviving hair or in the very tips of his bones. Finding such a chemical signature would be the closest thing to a smoking gun we could ever hope for. It would transform a historical suspicion into a scientific fact. But the absence of such a finding would not definitively prove natural causes, as some organic poisons leave no lasting trace. The silence of the bones would be just that, silence, not an exoneration. The ethical dilemma here is profound. Should we disturb the 9-century rest of a king, even to solve a mystery? Is the pursuit of historical truth worth the violation of a tomb, the potential damage to a priceless artifact, and the spiritual disruption to a place of worship? For now, Worcester Cathedral holds its secret closely. The effigy gazes upward, its stone face giving nothing away. All the whispers of treason, the theories of illness, the shadows of conspiracy end at this marble slab. The evidence we crave is inches away, yet separated from us by centuries of reverence and stone. It is the ultimate cold case, a puzzle with a potential solution forever locked just out of reach. Stone and bone hold their secrets, but words shape the world. In the chaotic aftermath of the king's death, a new battle began immediately, a war not for the crown but for the story. Controlling the narrative of how John died was just as critical as controlling his 9-year-old son. The royalist faction, led by William Marshal, faced an impossible task. They had to legitimize a child king born of a hated tyrant, end a civil war, and expel a French invasion. The last thing they needed was the explosive scandal of a royal assassination. That would imply deep, unresolved treachery within the kingdom, a wound that could never heal. It would give the French Prince Louis a powerful propaganda tool, painting the Plantagenets as a dynasty so corrupt they were murdered by their own. So the Regency had a crystal-clear motive to promote, and perhaps even to firmly believe, the simplest explanation. A king, worn down by the strains of war and a tragic accident, succumbed to a common camp sickness. It was mundane, it was uncontroversial. Most importantly, it was an act of God, not of man. This natural death narrative allowed for a clean, dignified succession. Young Henry could be portrayed as an innocent inheritor of a tragic fate, not the beneficiary of a coup. The story of Dysentery was politically sterile, a safe foundation on which to rebuild a broken nation. It allowed everyone, even the rebels, to step back from the brink without admitting to the ultimate crime. But across the lines, the rebels and their clerical chroniclers wielded a different kind of narrative weapon. For them, a natural death was not enough. They needed a moral, so they took the same set of facts, the same illness, and infused it with divine meaning. In their telling, John's painful, humiliating end was not a random biological event. It was the direct judgment of heaven. God had struck down a wicked king who had persecuted the church and oppressed his people. The dysentery was the instrument of divine wrath. This version served the rebels perfectly. It justified their rebellion as a holy cause. It framed their victory as God's will, and it placed a permanent stain of sin on John's memory. It was a satisfying, morally complete story. And what of the whispers of murder? If a rebel agent had indeed poisoned the king, their leadership would never officially admit it. Public boasting of regicide by stealth would make them monsters in the eyes of Europe and invalidate any moral high ground. But privately, in taverns and castle halls, rumors of a successful assassination could have circulated as a source of grim pride and intimidation, a warning to any future tyrant. These underground stories, hinting at a secret victory, could later seep into chronicles as ambiguous hints, like that strange note about the fatal peaches. So we are left with a historical echo chamber where every major player found the dysentery story useful. For the royalists, it was a face-saving tragedy. For the rebels, it was a righteous punishment. For the silent assassin, if he existed, it was the perfect cover. This convergence of interest is perhaps the most compelling argument for the natural death theory. When everyone agrees on a story, it often becomes the truth, not because it is verified, but because it is convenient. The messy, uncertain reality of those October days was smoothed over, whitewashed by the urgent need for peace and a stable new order. The mystery we grapple with today may be less a genuine historical whodunit and more a ghost, a lingering whisper of the chaos that was deliberately buried so that England could live. This act of historical shaping forces us to confront a final, unsettling question. If the truth was inconvenient 900 years ago, how can we possibly hope to uncover it now? The story of King John's death was too tempting a canvas for fiction to ignore. While historians debated, playwrights and balladeers stepped in to deliver a far more satisfying verdict. They wove his end into a grand moral tapestry, one where the villain always gets his due. This literary legacy did more than entertain. It permanently shaped how we view the man and the mystery surrounding his final days. William Shakespeare, the master of historical drama, turned his attention to the king in the play simply titled King John. But in a curious twist, Shakespeare's version almost entirely glosses over the king's death. The play focuses on political machinations, wars of succession, and the king's conflicted conscience, but his demise is abrupt, almost an afterthought. He simply falls sick and dies, with little of the dramatic agony the chronicles described. Shakespeare, it seems, was less interested in how John died than in what his flawed reign said about power and legitimacy. By minimizing the death, Shakespeare left a void in the popular imagination, a space eagerly filled by a legend from the greenwood. For it is in the timeless tales of Robin Hood that King John found his permanent role as the ultimate villain. In these stories, he is the cruel, usurping brother of the noble Richard the Lionheart, taxing the poor into starvation while the true king is away on crusade. Robin Hood, the outlaw hero, becomes the people's champion against John's tyranny. This narrative framework is powerfully simple, a clear battle between good and evil. And within that framework, a mysterious, painful death for the bad king feels not like a historical puzzle, but like poetic justice. The audience of a Robin Hood ballad does not wonder about dysentery or poison. They nod in satisfaction, believing that such a wicked ruler could only meet a fittingly grim end. Fiction provided the closure that history denied. This cultural conditioning runs deep. For centuries, people have absorbed the story of King John not from dusty chronicles, but from plays, novels, and films that cast him as a one-dimensional tyrant. When we then approach the historical record of his death, we are already primed to suspect the worst. A sinister end feels right for such a sinister man. Our modern appetite for conspiracy theories in this case is fed by 900 years of storytelling that told us he deserved one. The mystery becomes more compelling because the fictional version of John is so vividly hateable. We want the historical reality to match the dramatic satisfaction of the legend. Did he die from a peach or from a plot? In our minds, shaped by Robin Hood, the plot feels more true to his character. This is the invisible power of story. It prepares the ground for suspicion, making us more receptive to whispers of treason than to bland medical facts. The literary legacy has tried and convicted King John long before we ever examine the evidence. Modern historians sift through the chronicles with a different set of tools, weighing probability over poetic justice. The consensus among scholars like Mark Morris and Dan Jones leans heavily, almost decisively, toward a natural death. Their reasoning is grounded in brutal medieval reality. Armies were petri dishes for disease, sanitation was non-existent, food spoiled quickly, and water sources were routinely contaminated. For a king marching with his forces in the damp autumn of East Anglia, contracting a severe gastrointestinal infection was not just possible, it was statistically likely. Dan Jones often frames it as the simplest explanation, and in historical analysis, the simplest explanation is frequently the correct one. There was no need for a complex conspiracy when a microscopic bacterium or parasite, carried in a sip of dirty water or a bite of tainted food, could do the job just as effectively. The trauma of the treasure loss, they argue, would have severely weakened John's constitution, making him a perfect target for any pathogen circulating in his camp. This is the clean, epidemiological verdict of modern scholarship. Yet, even within this consensus, a shadow of doubt persists, and it is a shadow cast by the king's own monstrous reputation. Historians acknowledge that while the evidence points to dysentery, the perfect convenience of his death is a coincidence that continues to whisper. Mark Morris notes that John was so uniquely hated, his death solved so many pressing problems for so many powerful people, that it inevitably fuels speculation. The poison theory, while a minority view, is kept alive by this profound circumstantial irony. In any other reign, a king dying of camp fever would be a tragic footnote. In John's case, it feels like a plot point. Scholars may dismiss the deliberate act, but they cannot dismiss the breathtakingly neat political resolution it provided. The lingering question is not really about medical science, but about human nature. In a world where John had repeatedly shown himself capable of murder and betrayal, is it so hard to believe that someone, seeing a clear path to peace and profit, might have decided to help a natural process along? The official history may be written by the victors, but the whispers are kept alive by the deep human understanding of motive. The king's final 10 days paint a clinical picture of agony. We have the patient's chart, written not by a doctor but by horrified chroniclers. The symptoms are stark and sequential. It began with a sudden, gripping pain in his abdomen, severe enough to double him over. A raging fever quickly followed, burning through him. Then came the relentless, debilitating diarrhea, draining his strength with each passing hour. The entire progression from first complaint to final breath spanned only about 10 days. This rapid decline is our most crucial clue. For a man in his late 40s, even a sick one, this swiftness is alarming. It points to something violently disruptive, an invader that ravaged his system with terrifying efficiency. So let us place these symptoms side by side with our 3 main suspects and see which one fits the evidence like a key in a lock. First, the official verdict: bacterial dysentery. The match is remarkably good. Severe abdominal cramping, high fever, and watery, often bloody diarrhea are its classic hallmarks. Dysentery thrives in the exact conditions of John's campaign: poor sanitation, contaminated food or water, and close quarters. The timeline also fits, as the infection can take hold quickly and lead to death from dehydration and sepsis within a week or 2 for a vulnerable patient. Given his exhaustion and recent trauma, his body was the perfect host. This is the simplest and most historically consistent diagnosis, but we must test the alternatives. Our second suspect is acute food poisoning, perhaps from those infamous peaches. Spoiled fruit can harbor bacteria like Salmonella or E. coli. The symptoms: violent abdominal cramps, fever, and severe diarrhea, often appearing within hours of consumption and lasting for days. If the peaches were badly contaminated, they could have delivered a massive bacterial load that overwhelmed the king. This theory neatly explains the chronicler's specific note about the fatal remedy. It could have been a tragic accident, a final piece of bad luck from a rotten snack given with good intentions. Now we turn to the darkest possibility, poison. And here, one substance stands out, arsenic. In the 13th century, arsenic trioxide, a white, tasteless powder, was a known killer available from apothecaries and even used in small doses as a medicine. Its symptom profile is chillingly precise. A substantial dose causes a burning pain in the stomach and throat, intense thirst, and projectile vomiting. This is followed by profound muscle cramps and copious, watery diarrhea as the body tries desperately to purge the toxin. The victim weakens rapidly, often dying from shock and dehydration within a few days. The resemblance to dysentery is uncanny, a deliberate mimicry by nature's chemistry. A smaller, cumulative dose given over several days would produce a slower but equally fatal decline, perfectly matching the king's 10-day ordeal. Other plant-based poisons like monkshood could also produce similar gastrointestinal havoc. So where does this leave our diagnosis? Dysentery fits the evidence comfortably. It was common, the symptoms align, and the environment was ideal. But the critical point is this: the symptoms of severe dysentery, acute food poisoning, and arsenic poisoning are virtually identical, especially to a medieval observer with no microscope or toxicology screen. They all attack the same system in the same brutal way. The rapid 10-day timeline supports each one, pointing to a potent, fast-acting agent, whether microbial or mineral. Based solely on the described symptoms, we cannot rule any of them out. The medical evidence gives us a list of plausible culprits, but it cannot, by itself, point a definitive finger. To move closer to a verdict, we must look beyond the body's reactions and into the hearts and minds of the people who surrounded it. These lingering doubts are the very soul of the mystery. If it was merely a case of common camp fever, why does the chronicler Ralph of Coggeshall single out a specific medicinal drink of ale and peaches as the fatal agent? In an age where kings died of vague ailments all the time, such a precise, peculiar detail feels like a clue deliberately left in the record, a whisper the writer could not ignore. It suggests a rumor so persistent it demanded to be written down, a story circulating in the months after the king's death that his end was not entirely natural. Then there is the haunting coincidence of the Wash disaster. The utter annihilation of the royal treasury was a catastrophe of almost biblical proportions, a blow from which John's spirit and his war effort never recovered. The timing is so devastatingly perfect it begs the question: was it merely cruel luck or a calculated act of sabotage that precipitated the final crisis? A treasure lost is one thing, but a treasure lost followed immediately by the king's death feels like two acts of a single tragic play. And this leads to the most perplexing question of all: why was there no official outcry, no investigation into poisoning at the time? Given the sheer number of people who wanted John dead, from rebel barons to French agents to his own embittered followers, the silence is deafening. In a normal reign, such a sudden death would have sparked immediate suspicion and bloody reprisals, but in 1216 the silence was unanimous. Every faction, for their own reasons, found the story of a natural death profoundly useful. The new regency needed stability, not a murder scandal. The rebels could claim divine judgment. Any potential assassin would, of course, stay quiet. The collective agreement to accept the dysentery story became the first act of rebuilding the kingdom, a necessary fiction for peace. We are left, then, with a historical crime scene that was tidied up too well, too quickly. The official report was filed, the convenient cause of death was recorded, and the nation moved on to save itself. The truth was likely buried, not under the sands of the Wash, but under the overwhelming political need for the war to end. This is why the mystery endures. History may never give us the forensic evidence or the deathbed confession that solves the case. The definitive answer is lost to time, sealed in a tomb and scattered in the tidal mud. But it is the gaps in the story, the haunting coincidences, and the human temptation to see pattern in chaos that keep us coming back, turning over the same clues for 900 years. We are drawn to the enigma because, in the end, both possibilities are equally compelling. A king felled by a microscopic accident of nature, or a tyrant removed by the deliberate, hidden hand of history. The lack of proof is what makes the story live forever. The path from a frantic march to a silent tomb is littered with unanswered questions. We have followed a broken king from the storm-swept mudflats of the Wash to a fevered deathbed in Newark Castle, sifting through 9 centuries of rumor and record. The balance of probabilities, weighed by both medieval circumstance and modern scholarship, tips the scales toward a grimly ordinary end. Dysentery was the relentless shadow of every medieval army, and King John, exhausted, shocked, and vulnerable, was its perfect victim. The medical evidence, as we understand it, fits. The historical context makes dreadful sense. It is the simplest answer, and often in history, the simplest answer is the truth. Yet the circumstances of his death are a masterpiece of historical irony, so perfectly convenient they defy belief. His demise solved every political crisis at once, saving his dynasty by removing its greatest liability. In a world he had filled with enemies capable of any cruelty, the opportunity for poison was undeniably present. The chronicler's strange note about the fatal peaches lingers like a ghost in the official story. So we are left not with a solution, but with a permanent mystery, one of history's most tantalizing what-ifs. The evidence for dysentery is strong, but the suspicion of foul play is irresistible. This is where you, the jury, must decide. Look back over the evidence we have gathered. Consider the lost treasure, the timely illness, the silent beneficiaries. Then cast your verdict in the comments below. Was it dysentery or poison? Let us know what you believe happened in that Lincolnshire castle in October 1216. If you enjoyed this deep dive into a medieval cold case, subscribe for more journeys into the shadows of the past, where history's greatest mysteries are waiting to be unraveled.